and do you understand? And now you the Clara Ramba, Zan, Rongo, Tila, Ramba Tani, Zan, Mason. Tell us in the penny, and part of the somebody sending until that Jim Barton is about Ramba, so. Sonju Sami Jepakona, La Deni, Sanan, so low, Tela, Javaton, some get Seratan, Sanan, so that sort of.
Within the Sutrayana traditions, we do not have the methods or the skillful means of development process meditation in the course of which we, of course, imagine ourselves in the shape of the deity. We do not have the various methods which allow us to work or to meditate, to contemplate upon the inner channels or energy currents called winds or tiglas or essences. All of these methods, these skillful means which are so efficient, are not available in the Sutrayana tradition. If we were to practice according to the Sutra tradition, what would be left us would be to train ourselves in what is commonly known as the 6 transcendent virtues, or the 6 parameters, which are the virtues of generosity, of patience, of discipline, conduct, etc. If we train ourselves in this way, we have been told time and again that the actual time that it needs to achieve the awakening or to get to the awakening of Buddhahood, that it takes 3 incalculable eons. So for that long period of time we have to train ourselves in these virtues in order to accumulate merit, etc., to rid ourselves of negative imprints and the like, before we can hope to achieve the awakening of Buddhahood. Swami Rinpoche continues to explain in his text that the unsurpassable ones, meaning the highest tantras, the 4 tantra classes, they are methods which bring about the attainment of Buddhahood within a single lifetime. Of course, they teach such methods as to imagine one's own body in the shape of the deity. These teachings are profound. So in this regard, we are fortunate that we find ourselves in the time of the Buddha Shakyamuni, the Buddha of our time, of our age, who has taught all of these various methods of the various tantras, the various skillful means that we can employ to proceed rather more quickly towards the awakening of Buddhahood.
So what I mean is freedom for all. Take it, look at something, talk and reach it, long, multiply, SARS, Aranta, may lose a secret, sending Tonki, and I will Lula, and Lara, more training. Around then Semla, Semgritala, and Shawajip Tani. Drambala, Papa and Zinja, Lasso. So, more Tonton Matthew, Lasso, Tindra, Joyo, something more written.
When we speak about the tantras here, which have the ability to bring us to the attainment of Buddhahood in a single lifetime, we particularly, or rather, Chagma in particular, means the highest of the 4 tantra classes. So from among the 4 classes of tantra, of course he speaks here about the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, the unsurpassable, the highest class of all of these. And it is a feature of these particular tantras which belong to this tantra class that they include instructions which allow us to recognize our own body as the body of the deity. Presently we hang on to, or we cling on to, the idea of an ordinary human body, but if we were to employ the means taught within these tantras, we were to come to recognize our body as that of the deity, and as such we would come to learn how within our heart center there dwell the 42 peaceful deities, and our throat center there are the 8 pure knowledge holders, or Vidyadharas as they're called, and within the crown of our head, or in the center in the crown of our head, we would recognize there to be the 50 wrathful, blood-drinking deities as they're literally called.
예당하에 정거를 저도 못 찍는 예당하에 정거를 대라 배나 나랑 르는다 되는 나온다 자som 홀로 예 요래 그래서 자 오마디 tenga 예 로마디 가도 말고 예 장마디 가도 가고.
Chama Rinpoche continues then to say, thus your own body is the mandala of the Yidam deity. So in this way, in the highest Tantra classes, we are being taught various methods in order to recognize our own body as not different from the mandala of the Yidam deity, whichever it might be that we practice. And recognizing our body as the deity's body, we also recognize the fact that inside our body there are what is called the subtle energy channels. There is the central channel, then there is a right and a left channel standing next to the central channel, and at the four places within our body are the four centers, or the four wheels as they are literally called, which are side channels that branch off from the central channel. The central channel itself is for the most part imagined to be of a deep blue color, whereas the right channel is considered to be red, the left channel is imagined to be white in color. Then it is described that these four centers within our body, which find themselves arranged one on top of each other inside the central channel, have various numbers of branch channels, or side channels that branch off from the central channel. The wheel, or the center at the crown of our head, or rather just below the crown of our head, just below the very upper end of the central channel, is imagined to have 32 side channels, or channel petals as they're literally called, branching off from it. That center is also called as the center of wheel of great bliss. In the throat, we would imagine there to be 16 side channels, or channel petals branching off. That center is known as the great enjoyment center, or the great enjoyment wheel. The channel petals that branch off from the heart are 8 in number, and that center is known as the Dharma wheel, or the center of the Dharma. And then we have the center or the wheel in our navels, which is considered to have 64 channels branching off from the central channel. That chakra, or that wheel or center, is known as the emanation center, or emanation wheel. These three main channels and the four centers with the side channels, or channel petals that branch off from these centers, from the main channel for that matter, are commonly known as the channels and the wheels of the path, because they are that which we partly focus upon in the course of our practice, which are means of proceeding through the practice, of developing through the practice. And these channels and the setup, as they have been described, will for the most part always be much the same ones, no matter what sort of practice we might take up, be it Chakras, be it Guhyasamaja, be it Vajrayogini. The setup in all of these practices is very much the same indeed. These channels and channel petals, etc., are at a certain point within our practice the focus of our attention within whatever meditation practice, whatever deity we might practice, and they are being eventually purified of whatever obscurations, whatever things there might possibly be. Once we have fully purified them, we then speak of them as the resultant channels, channel petals, etc. Wheels. This is basically what we focus upon within our practice, and what the result of that practice will be, the purification of these, of all their veils, obscurations, and violence of whatever sort. So such is the focus of our attention in the course of these practices, and once we have trained, or we begin to train ourselves, and then we commence the process of purification of whatever defilements there might be within the setup of our subtle energy channels, the energies that move within there, etc. Once we have embarked upon that path, we make sure that eventually, once we have brought about such purification, then indeed that which is called the resultant channel petals, etc., is being achieved. And once that is fully achieved, that is the very basis for our realization of what is known as the indestructible Bodhisattva of all Buddhas. Within these channels of ours moves what is commonly called wind. And these winds, these subtle energies, etc., in part also manifest as our ordinary breath, the breath that we inhale and exhale through our nostrils and through our mouth for the most part. It is said that an ordinary being, in the course of a whole day, in the course of 24 hours, so to speak, has or counts a movement of 21,000 such breaths, or there are 21,000 such wind movements in the course of a 24-hour period. These 21,000 movements, or the winds, the breath that moves in such a way 21,000 times, is commonly known as karma prana, or karmic winds. It is, however, also said that among these 21,000 breath or wind movements, there are 11 which are called awareness or wisdom winds. Now these karmic winds, as they're called, and their movements are for the most part not really visible to us, or not really perceivable other than movement of wind. However, if one were to categorize them, which says that these winds, which have the nature of the 5 elements, they inhale and exhale, or they extend through both of our nostrils, the left and the right one, similarly. And it is said that the wind that corresponds to the earth element, which is of a somewhat heavier nature, that it moves somewhere in the lower part of this exhalation of wind, and it extends from our exhalation from our nostrils out for about 8 finger breaths before it dissolves. The water wind, that it moves a little bit higher than the earth wind, is said to extend about 10 finger breaths. Then the fire wind is said to extend about 12 finger breaths from our nostril until it dissolves. And the wind that is commonly associated with the wind element, so the wind of wind, so to speak, extends for about 14 finger breaths, whereas the space wind extends for about 16 finger breaths out of our nostrils from the point of exhalation before they eventually dissolve.
Roma Toga long the mentor. The Toga long song of a ye Romani yours the long Shokambo Mombo Dina. Tea long take Celia, Aronton, Sana, Yamova, that Auto Shadow, don't last of our only from the tea younger. Long de Latine. De Latine, Roma Toga long. Sang around Temba Sumji Johnson, young lady, Yoga simply Yatap, simply Yat, Yoga Sala Pap. Then, so long, no Ibate, garden, and then young lady, they simply Yatap to the wa. They and Naransan, then Shendro Casa, Ye, Roma Toga, Shokamu, Juna, and Yamu Topa Mombo younger, they got with the and simply Yatap, so the young lady by hands, and this one.
All of these winds, if they have been described, these breaths, so to speak, are for the most part the breaths which are of the nature of the emotional defilements, of obscurations, etc. Particularly the breath that moves through the right nostril and correspondingly also through the right channel is commonly known as the poisonous wind, because in particular all sorts of emotional defilements such as anger, jealousy, pride, etc. and so forth are associated with the wind that moves predominantly through the right channel. Therefore, to pacify these would be indeed a good, we would be well advised to train ourselves in this way. And accordingly, the Buddha himself, the Buddha of our age, Buddha Shakyamuni, as he passed away, demonstrated how to do this. We have seen this possibly on paintings, how the Buddha, in the moment of passing away, lay down on his right side, and with the ring finger of his right hand, his head resting in the hand, he closed the right nostril in this way, such as to prevent agitated movement of breath through the right nostril and agitated movement of this so-called poisonous wind. It is said that when the moment of passing away would be upon us, that we would also be well advised to take up that position to make sure that there is not too much agitated movement of breath through the right nostril, which could possibly become a cause for a rebirth in the lower realms. Therefore, to assume that position when that moment is upon us and close off with the ring finger of the right hand the right nostril so as to prevent movement of breath of that particular sort, that would be the most advisable most advisable thing to do at this particular moment.
And now in the joys a long time, did long and up. I tell a Jama did long song of vacancy. The Tanga now in the job along the Shokshiro, Gina, and Arongasan, Sombada, Indeed, Saint Jude. Correspondingly,
the breath or the wind that moves predominantly through the left nostril is known as the nectar wind. Why is it called thus? It is called the nectar wind because it supports all the positive qualities, such as kindness, such as compassion towards others, such as ethical conduct, such as exerted effort, etc., and so forth. So all of these positive qualities are being furthered by the movement of the wind that moves through the left channel and the left nostril. Therefore, it is called the nectar wind. This being so is exactly the reason why when we train ourselves in shamatha or shina meditation, that emotional defilements, etc., come to be somewhat pacified, whereas qualities of our mind nature and of our mind stream are being enhanced to a certain extent. When these breaths through the right and the left nostrils come into peaceful balance, then whatever rides on the breath that moves through the left nostril, such as pride, jealousy, anger, whatever emotional defilement there might be, is being pacified somewhat, whereas the breath that moves through the left nostril enhances all positive qualities within ourselves. For the most part, we have now heard mainly about what is known as the karmic wind, the karma prana, and how, of course, there is a necessity of purifying these karmic winds, purifying it of its defilements, whatever obscurations, whatever shortcomings there might be. Within the Vajrayana tradition, we have several very efficient means of doing so, and one of those most efficient means is a manipulation of breath, a breathing technique that is known as flask breathing. If we train ourselves accordingly in such flask breathing exercises, then the result of that would eventually be that all the negativities, all the defilements of the karmic winds would be completely purified, and thus the karmic winds, the karma prana, would eventually be transformed into what is known as the wisdom or awareness winds, the jnana prana. While we still find ourselves on the path of practice, these winds, as we have also heard before, are referred to as the path winds, whereas once we have brought about the purification of these pranas, of these winds, they would be referred to as the resultant winds. If we train ourselves accordingly and eventually achieve that goal that is being sought after with such practice, we bring about what is known as the realization of the speech vajra of all Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and we will eventually realize or achieve the realization of Sambodhika. Riding upon these winds, so to speak, are what is called the essences, or Bindus with the Sanskrit term, tiglit in Tibetan. Essences or drops, you could call them. And these, for the most part, as we find ourselves as ordinary beings, are also that which, when we put them into practice, or when we concern ourselves practice-wise with these essences, are known as the path essence. Our body is, since its conception until the present moment, been endowed with two sorts of essence of Bindu. We have the white and the red essence of Bindu, which we of course inherited from our father and mother, which brought about the development of our body in the first place. We would, as we concern ourselves practice-wise with these Bindus, view the red essence of the red Bindu within our bodies as of the nature of warmth or heat. It is the heat which we go for in the Chandali or Tummo practice, and we would view the nature of, we would view the white Bindu, the white essence, as of the nature of bliss. If we were to train ourselves in these practices which actualize the tiglis or the bindus, the essences within our body, we would, as we have heard, concentrate upon them as the red essence being present in our navel, being of the essence of heat, whereas we would imagine the white essence, which is of the nature of bliss, or which also stands for skillful means, at the crown of our head. Practicing or employing the various techniques through which these are being purified, through which these are being applied for that matter, we would eventually go through the experience of what is known as the four types of enjoyment, or the four types of bliss. There would be enjoyment, supreme enjoyment, unsurpassable enjoyment, and conic enjoyment. And this is, for the most part, the focus of the practice practices which we would employ in order to purify, in order to actualize these. If we were to train ourselves accordingly, we would indeed effect the complete purification, complete transformation of these essences, or tiglis as they're called, these bindus, and the results of that, whereas up to the present moment we still speak of the path bindu, would be the completely immaculate, purified bindu, also called the resultant bindu. So in this way, with these various practices which employ channels, the energies that flow within them, the winds, as well as the essences which ride upon these winds, a method is being described through which we can employ our present body, the body that we come with at this particular moment, in such a way so as to achieve the complete liberation, complete awakening of Buddhahood in a single lifetime. And once through the implementation of these practices we have purified our subtle channels, energies, channels, winds and energies in such a way that would eventually result in the realization of the three Buddhakayas, which are of course the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and eventually also the Nirmanakaya. If we were only diligent enough, then indeed we could train ourselves in these practices. Whatever Yidam deity we would use as the basis for these practices, be it Chakrasamvara or Vajravaraya or White Tara for that matter, we would then proceed through the individual stages of the practice, such as development process, meditation, mantra repetition of a certain number of mantras before we're able to proceed to the next step, which would be perfection process, a part of which these practices of channels and winds, etc. are. And we would eventually be able to proceed in this way, to develop in this way. And if we were only diligent enough, Rinpoche says, then of course whatever great qualities are being brought about through such practices could indeed be actualized. Accordingly, Changma Rinpoche continues to say, well, to see one's own body as the deity mandala, such as Chakras or Guhyasamaja, or the 8 Herukas, which are a set of practice that's used in the Nyingma practice, in the Nyingma tradition, including such deities as Vajrakila, as Yandak, etc., and so forth. To see your body as this is being taught in the highest, this is being taught in a complete way, in complete detail in the highest tantras. For instance, if we were to look at the Chakras-Tantra and its corresponding practices, how did they come into being? There was, once upon a time, at the time of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva Vajragarva, who went into the presence, Vajragarva, who went into the presence of the Buddha and requested this Tantra to be taught. The Buddha gave his consent, and immediately he himself, the Buddha himself, assumed the form or the shape of Chakras-Samvara, and having assumed that shape, he then proceeded to teach the corresponding Chakras-Samvara-Tantra. The Guhyasamaja-Tantra, which is also mentioned here, was then eventually requested by the king Indrabhuti from the Buddha himself. King Indrabhuti, one day, together with his courtiers, etc., found himself in one of his many gardens or parks, having themselves a picnic, and at a certain point in time he looked up into the skies, and to his great surprise he saw a flock of yellow-robed monks flying by. Greatly surprised about this event, he thought on this for quite a while, and eventually he remembered an old sage in his retinue, an old minister of his who he thought would be wise enough to have an idea of what it was that the king had seen, and he called this old wise minister into his presence and asked him as to that strange event, and the old sage answered, well, what you saw there, O great king, was nothing other but students of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha who have achieved the state of arhatship, and they have that habit of flying about in the skies occasionally.
Tenga Songjin Dranche Peruti, in Sovatana, then Tenga Songjin Peruti.
The king, greatly surprised and pleased by this, thought, well, if the teaching of the Buddha indeed brings about such qualities within beings, then definitely I need to see the Buddha, definitely we should invite the Buddha here. And he asked this old minister of his, is it possible to invite the Buddha, and if so, how do we do that? How do we go about this? The minister answered, it is not difficult at all to invite the Buddha. The only thing we have to do is arrange a large amount of beautiful offerings such as incense and lamps and flowers and foods, and then we just need to pray to the Buddha from the bottom of our hearts for him to appear, and appear he will. Well, said and done, the offering was arranged, and then correspondingly in the bottom of their hearts they prayed for the Buddha to appear, and indeed in space in front of them the Buddha then all of a sudden arrived. The Buddha, having thus arrived in the presence of the king, was properly welcomed, and the king then eventually said to him, please teach me a method with which I can achieve the awakening of Buddhahood in a single lifetime, to which the Buddha replied, that was not difficult at all, but before we do so, what you have to do is take ordination. You have to become a fully ordained monk. At which the king said, no, that is not possible. I just cannot give up the 5 sense pleasures. There is no way. I'm so attached to them. Please teach me a method by which I can achieve Buddhahood without giving up these enjoyments. And as a response to that, the Buddha then immediately transformed into the shape of Guhyasamaja, the Guhyasamaja deity, and then taught the king Indrabhuti, the Guhyasamaja-Tantra and its corresponding practices and methods.
And Indrabhuti and Koranga and Mama Roma Mumbuyo Ramsey, Chakras, Matamjila, and someone to Dharma thing. And Tamjika, someone to get to Brown, do Tatula, and then Daru and the Jaka Tamji, and someone to Becky, get to Bergoni, Tamjin Jal Germany, and then Indrabhuti, Jaka Tamji, nobody someone.
Having thus received the transmission and the instructions of the Guhyasamaja-Tantra from the Buddha himself, the king then proceeded to train himself in these methods, and after a while achieved complete realization of these methods. He then continued to himself teach these methods to his court, his ministers, all of his servants, etc., and eventually to all the inhabitants, all his citizens, the people of his kingdom. And it is said that eventually all of these people, through the practice of Guhyasamaja, instantly achieved the realization of the rainbow body, and it is then accordingly said that the entire kingdom of King Indrabhuti body at once was empty.